Contact your runway 9 right, Bravo 2 and Bravo.
What is going on, everyone? Jim here with the Flying Midwest Podcast. Happy to see some of you tonight. Hopefully we'll get some people in on the live stream here in a few minutes. I'm going to get a couple things just set up in the background here, make sure I'm not echoing too bad, but then I'll get started chatting about some things, and hopefully we get some questions from some of you. So, exciting things that we're trying to do with the channel, including things like this. This is what it looks like when I'm super prepared, by the way. So to get started, those of you who aren't familiar with the channel, is the Flying Midwest Podcast is all about just connecting aviators from across America's heartland. So around the Midwest, we just want to capture the great things that other aviators are doing, share your stories, and really spread the word about aviation amongst others as well. So hopefully that is what we can accomplish through this, and we hope that people are enjoying what we're doing. We seem to be getting some pretty good feedback with that. A couple things I'm still trying to work out, so sorry about that. This also is what happens when we record with other people. There's a couple of minutes of me just messing around trying to figure things out. So apparently my audio is super quiet. Thanks, Brian. Let's see, is that any better? Brian Turner's in the house. The often name dropped Brian Turner extraordinaire. He's probably literally the only person watching too. So here's the deal. Here's what I'll talk about. I want to talk a little bit about what goes on behind the scenes of the podcast, how this all comes together, things like that. So I'll keep watching the chats here. If questions come up, I'll be happy to answer those. So be sure to shoot those in there. I'll maybe mention that a few times in case other people pop in. But how this goes in the background is we typically will find a guest for any given episode. We reach out to all sorts of different places, whether it be businesses, other aviators, cool stories we read about, things like that. We'll reach out on those venues, and from there, we'll make contact, see if someone's interested in coming on the podcast for an interview. Once we do that, we will get them all squared away for an interview. We'll set it up. We do most of our videos via Zoom, or our podcast rather. We do that via Zoom. We'll record that in advance of the actual podcast release. So we'll sit down with somebody. We'll talk to them for about an hour, maybe an hour and a half sometimes, to get the audio that we're looking for. Once we get to that point, it's typically me, Maddie, Trevor, and whoever our guest or guests are. We will meet with them on Zoom. We do the format that you hear. We'll ask them kind of that fast 5 questions just to get everyone moving. Sometimes it's had some unintended consequences of people being stumped for a little bit before they're actually able to get in there and get comfortable with the questions. So sometimes it has the opposite effect of getting people loose. But we're going to keep doing it. So any future guests, be prepared. From there, once we get people on board, we'll ask the questions that we have. We typically will sit down, create those question lists, and from there, we'll narrow that down as we go. We'll have our own show notes that we'll have up as we go, between the 3 of us that we share, and then go through the questions. We just take turns. Sometimes we'll write notes to each other within that as well to indicate maybe I've been talking too much and people are getting tired of hearing from me. So at that point, maybe Maddie or Trevor will ask a question. So from there, we get about, like I had said, hour and a half, sometimes a little bit more, depending on the conversation, for how much audio we get pulled together. After that, typically, as opposed to in advance, I know that when you hear the show, you hear the news and events and all that stuff first. We will typically record that the Wednesday before the episode release. So we try to look across the Midwest, just searching internet sites, checking the different Facebook groups that we're in, looking for that news and events and things to share with people. Oh, thanks, Brian. Appreciate that. So Brian shared this with his community tab. We appreciate you sharing. So again, from there, we will record those news and events segments. Honestly, that takes us longer sometimes than the actual interview. Just a matter of, you take an article, you summarize it, as opposed to, you don't want to read it verbatim. No one wants to hear us just read an article. So we do try to find relevant articles that'll be interesting to people in the aviation community, and then put our own little twist on it. The other thing that we like to do within that section, or all the sections rather, is we don't want to take this too seriously. This is supposed to be fun for all of us. This isn't like a full-time job. This isn't, our main gig or source of income by any stretch of the imagination. But what we'll do is we have fun, and we try to just keep things light and bring that lighter side of aviation there. And kind of my humble opinion, or sometimes people that take aviation way too seriously. Not that it shouldn't be taken seriously when it's appropriate. It is some serious business. We want to be safe. We want to make sure others are safe, things of that nature. But sometimes we all know those pilots that are just way into being pilots and maybe a little bit much for themselves. And that's, again, we want this to be fun. We want to be able to share our joy of aviation and keep it light. So that's mostly where our bloopers actually come from, because we keep it light with each other. We have a good time when we record. So poking fun at each other a little bit. There's more stuff that goes on in the background of that you just don't ever hear in the actual podcast. So that's another about hour and a half of raw audio that we create. So each episode that you hear that comes out to be an hour or so is really about 3 hours of raw audio that we create. From there, I've got some media platforms that I use that I'll actually I'll edit that audio down so that it is that usable hour-long podcast that you actually hear. Quick little plug for Audible, because that is the source that we actually use to publish our podcasts. Or not Audible. What am I talking about? Audacity. Maybe I should actually look and make sure I know what the hell I'm talking about before I just start spawning off random, plugs for companies we don't even use. Both of those were wrong. It's Anchor. So I am now sounding like an idiot times 3, which is actually pretty common for the podcast. So we use Anchor. Typically what we do in Anchor is I will take that final raw audio file. I will be able to create that down into that 1 hour that we're looking for, and I will upload that audio file on Anchor. The advertisement that you hear at the very beginning of it, we do have a sponsored segment by Anchor is what they're called. So we have that sponsored segment from Anchor. We'll post that sponsor at the very beginning. There is a slight amount of revenue that comes to that. Every cent of that goes back into the podcast to try to create more exciting and better content for everybody. So that is the quick nuts and bolts of what actually goes into making an episode. If anyone has any comments, any questions, I've got the chat line open. That sounded super cheesy, but I'm talking to myself in my basement at this point. So that if you want to leave a message in the chat for any questions, comments that you've got, I'm happy to answer any of that. I see that Brian is the only one talking to me. I think that it's because mostly I do stalk him on the internet from time to time, so he must feel a need to reciprocate. So I do appreciate you being on here, Brian, and I appreciate you sharing with your community that I'm on here babbling to myself. So questions to come in, or any questions rather. I'll talk a little bit about some other things that we're working on. Our next episode, we will have Kyle Franklin on. Many of you have likely seen the air show performances that he does, where he goes in, does that drunken pilot routine. So we were fortunate enough to be able to connect with him just after Oshkosh, and he was gracefully agreed to come onto our podcast. He'll be interviewing with us tomorrow night, actually. So that is our in advance interview part that I talked. If anyone does have any questions, anything like that you'd like us to talk to Kyle about, you can certainly send that to us as well, and then go from there. We can certainly ask him any of those questions as long as they're appropriate, Brian. Hooks G001, thanks for joining us tonight. That's really cool that you met Maddie at AirVenture. I know she talked to so many great people. She was really excited about the connections that she made out there. So glad to have you on board. Glad to have you come and listen to this as well. Brian, you will get to meet me in person this weekend. As you may have seen, or maybe if any of you have listened to the podcast, I'm going to go up to the fly-in at 6 Yankee 9. Brian, if I'm mistaken, send me a message in here. But Sydenham, Michigan, I'll be up there this weekend. I will be flying in Saturday morning. My original plan was to fly in Friday, but with some work complications, I won't be able to fly out Friday night. I don't want to try to fly into an unlit grass strip that's a short field in the dark. So I'm going to wait until Saturday morning when there's daylight and I can actually fly in there, and I'll meet you out there and have a good time. So as I was talking about, so Kyle Franklin, he'll be on with us in our next episode, and we are all super excited to have him come on board to share his story. I've got so many questions I want to ask him about how he goes about his flying. I saw the video that Eric Johnson put up on his YouTube channel. I'll probably reach out to him and beg and plead to maybe be able to use that as a plug to show people what is really going on in the cockpit, because it is just so cool to see all the work he's doing to fly that badly. And I mean that, in all sincerity, that, his act that he puts together is so cool. And I watched Eric's video, and it is just incredible, the work that he puts in to make that go. And the other thing that I noticed that hopefully everybody else does too, he looks like he's having a blast while he's doing it. And that's what it's all about, really, just going out there, having a good time, and putting on a great show for people. So really, really excited to have him come on. Some of the other guests we have coming up in the next couple months include, we have a DNR pilot from the state of Minnesota. So he goes out, and it's not just what you think of where we call them crappie cops, just to give them some grief. But the crappie cops don't just go out there and bust you for fishing violations. Those pilots actually go through and do some really neat stuff with surveying some of the different herds of wildlife that we have in the state of Minnesota. I'd imagine it's probably similar in other states, but I happened to meet our guest for that episode, Jason, at a fly-in in I believe it was Buffalo, Minnesota. The Great Minnesota Aviation Get-Together, or Gathering, I think they call it, so they don't get sued by the state fair. But what we'll do from there, we'll talk to Jason about all the cool things he does with the DNR herd counts, and even sometimes checking out the lake ice quality, looking for ice out in some of these lakes at the start of spring, things like that. But that should be an interesting conversation as well. Oh, Hooks, that's awesome. He says this is an awesome place where I could have a merch shirt stapled on the wall. I'm wearing one, so there's that. If you listen to the podcast, you will note that I do say that is one of the acceptable uses for a T-shirt. You can wear the damn thing. Probably one of the original uses for a T-shirt. There's a lot of things you could do with it. Change your oil. I'm sure Brian has probably covered things you can do with a T-shirt in some of his videos. Maybe he hasn't. Ideas for the future, Brian. But at any rate, no, I'm just going to wear mine. But Trevor, if he wants to buy a T-shirt and staple it to the wall, have at it, buddy. I hope he's watching so he can catch this and get a good laugh out of it. Another thing I'll just mention real quick is Trevor may be kind of off and on throughout the next couple episodes. He's wrapping up his training in his flight engineer school down in Alabama. It's pretty intensive stuff for him right now, so he's going to try to join us when he can. If he can't, he can't, but he's doing some great work down there, learning his trade to be, the best flight engineer that he can be once he is ready to rock and roll with the Air Force. Brian, thank you. I assume you're talking about Eric Johnson. I know that you flew to Oshkosh with him, so I'm hoping maybe you can put a good word in for us. I'm going to experiment with something while we're live here. You're going to see me do a live while I'm doing a live. It's never been done before, I'm sure. But I want to jump onto our Facebook and try to get some people interested in that. So you can hear me stumble over that live too. In the meantime, anyone other than Brian have a question? Not that you can't ask more, Brian. I'm just, in general, opening the opportunity for others to come in and check out or ask some questions. Here we go. Hey everyone, Jim here with the Flying Midwest Podcast. I am live on Facebook right now, but I will also be live on YouTube. I've been on there for about, 15, 20 minutes now. So if you are not on our YouTube channel, just search Flying Midwest Podcast on YouTube. You'll be able to pull up our live. So if you watch this back later, I'm like 3 times live right now. Maybe them breaking some sort of space-time continuum, I don't know. But come check us out over on the YouTube channel. Hope to see you there. I'm here to answer some questions. I'll be here until, probably about 9:30. Oh, yeah, and see ya. There we go. Any talk of expanding the podcast to other regions of the U.S.? At first when we started this out, it was that focus of connecting aviators across America's heartland, like we have on our websites, and it's our cheesy little slogan that we pull out every once in a while. But it's kind of true. Some of us find this part of the country kind of a unique area for flying. Would we expand it into other areas of the country? Maybe. I can't see why we would want to limit ourselves. And I know I'm sick of hearing Brian's name too, but take Brian, for example. He is definitely not in the Midwest. He's out of Texas, and we were more than happy to bring him in here. I haven't reached out to him yet, and this is something I haven't asked anybody about either at this point. But I'd like to talk to Fire Pilot. Being a first responder myself, I love to talk to another first responder about the content they create. And an important thing kind of near and dear to my heart is how first responders are taking care of themselves outside of their line of work. So for me personally, it's creating this content. It's flying, things like that. Anything I can do that's creative or challenge myself in the air, those are the things that I personally do to, I guess, not remove myself, but find something else to occupy myself so that I'm not completely immersed within that world of first responders, because there is enough trauma that's there that sometimes you need to take a break from that and find a group of people that have absolutely nothing to do with that line of work and interact with them. Remember that there's normal people out there that aren't maybe as warped as we are, for lack of better terms. So that's a big part of why I do what I do, not only in content creation but in aviation as well. So really good question. I certainly don't want to limit the podcast, but as time goes on, maybe it's just you got 3 knuckleheads that are from the Midwest to talk to anyone involved in aviation. So I've got some good friends in Florida, so I wouldn't want to limit that either. So appreciate you being on here, Grant, and asking that question. That's a good question. So some future things with the podcast itself that I'm looking at exploring. I'm going to preface this in case my instructor is paying attention. I'm working on my commercial rating right now. I got a check ride coming up in the middle of October, so I don't want to dive too headfirst into the other parts of the project that we're looking at until I'm wrapped up with that, because it's going to take up a little bit more time, obviously, as I work on creating different types of content. If you watched the intro of this, if you joined us at the very beginning, then you likely saw the intro clip that we created. That is kind of the direction I want to go, as well as working on some YouTube content that again explores that idea of seeing what other aviators are up to, the great things that people do around aviation, and sharing that with others, maybe inspiring others, whatever the case may be, or maybe it's just something cool that people like to check out. But that is something that we will look at in the future. But I got to wrap up my commercial rating first. I think that if I try to launch a full YouTube channel right now, whether it be part of the podcast or not, my instructor may murder me. Nah, she wouldn't do that, but I don't think she'd be a big fan of me taking on one more thing before I wrap up that rating. So on that note, you may have heard me talk about in the last podcast some of the maneuvers and stuff that I've been working on. Basically all of them for the commercial rating I've been trying to brush up on again. Again, with that check ride coming up middle of October, I want to get some reps in on those, be proficient, feel comfortable with the aircraft. Some of these maneuvers I've haven't brushed up on a lot in the last, I guess, year, just because of all the stuff we've got going on. On that note, the hangar that I own with a couple of partners, we've been doing a lot of work on that. The beach house, we do have a video on this channel that shows a little tour of that. We have since gotten a lot of sheetrock up. We've done some painting. We got some people come in to insulate the thing because it's Minnesota and it gets cold as hell here. So to run a heater within our hangar without insulation is just stupid. So it's going to be fully insulated. We'll have the heater running so that it's at least 40, 45 degrees when we go into the hangar before we pre-flight, things like that. So Maybe we're babying ourselves a little bit. Maybe we're not. I don't know. But that's something that we thought was important to have a heated hanger up here. So that's coming along nicely. We've painted about, I'd say, maybe 2/3 of the hanger at this point. We've got some work to do still, but we are certainly working on getting the hanger up to speed. I'm really excited to get that project finished. We're gonna have a nice little living space there. So I will do a quick tour of the hangar again when we complete that project. So more and more projects in the works, but all good things. I guess I'll talk about Maddie real quick too, since we talked about Trevor for a minute ago. I don't want Maddie to feel left out. So Maddie recently moved down to Kansas, as some of you likely know. She has been working on her first instructing job, so she's been very busy getting a lot of time in the air with new students and just learning the ropes of that company, so she can, do a good job instructing there. I believe she's in the Wichita area. Yep, Wichita area. So she'll be kind of enjoying that. She's going to be moving into her first on her own apartment, I think, here pretty soon, from the place that she's been staying at temporarily since she moved down there. So she'll have a new place that she's hanging out at, hopefully very soon. Fire pilot is on his way. Brian, you're freaking awesome, man. I can't thank you enough. Yeah, that's good. I'd love to talk to him, whether it be in this chat or I'd love to get him on the podcast someday if I can schedule it somehow. But we'll see what he says in the comments, and maybe he sees that I'm just a knucklehead like some of the other people on YouTube, and says, "Nah, I'm good." So anyway, Maddie, she's been working hard on that stuff. That has kind of dictated some of our recording too, as far as days of the week. So we kind of have to pigeonhole our guests into a couple different days so we can make that happen. We basically can make like 1.5 nights a week pan out for our recording itself. So the fire pilot, did someone sound the alarm? I sure did, fire pilot. It's great to see you in here. I hear you met Maddie out at AirVenture, and she spoke very highly of you. It sounds like she was memorable, is what Trevor told us. But super glad to have you here. I don't know if Brian gave you a tip on what I was talking about. I'm a first responder as well, putting aviation content out. Granted, it's a podcast versus YouTube. This is one of our first ventures into doing live stuff on YouTube. So, but I'd love to talk to you sometime, man, and maybe get you on the podcast. For me personally, like I had said a few minutes ago, everyone else just hang in for a second. I'm just going to talk to the fire pilot for a minute. For me personally, I find aviation and creating any type of content, whether it be this, photography I did for a long time, as you can see maybe on the back wall back there, things like that. Those are kind of my outlets from public safety and first response stuff. There's a lot of trauma that we can experience, and I find that there's some great benefits in involving yourself in something that has nothing to do with first response. So that's a big part of what I do, to interact with great people like Maddie, Trevor, all the other pilots at the airport I fly in, occasionally Brian over social media, if you want to count him as the great people in aviation. But yeah, that's huge to me. So I'd love to hear your take on that too. Maybe we can chat offline at some point, and I just love to hear your story as well about how you got into this, if that played a part of it too. So, but yeah, let's chat offline sometime. We'll try to set something up to get you on and chat with us. I think we're all fans of what you do too. So, thanks for jumping on here tonight. Appreciate that. 100% agree. That's your outlet too. That's awesome, man. I'd love to hear that too. Yeah, I'm a huge proponent of that, and whether it be police, fire, EMS, you got to find something that's not that line of work to get out and realize people are normal. Or, I mean, they're not normal. Nobody's really normal. But, just to realize there's more out there than just the terrible things that we see, because no one calls us to celebrate their birthday. Well, maybe you, because you're a firefighter. Maybe go to birthday parties and have a great time doing that. But other lines of work, they don't always get called to the fun stuff. Getting some water here. I want to talk about the merchandise real quick. We do have our merchandise site that is up. That is flyingmidwest.com. I think it's /merch. That same thing with the advertising we do at the beginning of the episode. That is completely All that goes back into the podcast. That's not anything I put in my pocket. I'm not trying to use this as a source of revenue for my own personal gain. This is all to make more content. So, again, this was all created for other outlets, which is what we did. So, but if we can put some things back into the podcast, that's what we're trying to do. So if you're interested in one of these t-shirts, we also have one with a way smaller logo if you don't like the in-your-face huge logo on the front of your chest. You can check that out on the website like I had mentioned. So, see, I knew it. You go to birthday parties, you go to back-to-school parties. That's cool, man. I actually do. That is one of my favorite parts of my job, when I can get out in the community and interact with people in a positive light as opposed to sometimes the negative. So that is awesome that you're able to go out and do that stuff, and because I get some fulfillment out of that too. So awesome, man. What else do you guys want me to talk about? I'm gonna hang out for, I don't know, another however long people keep watching me babble. The other thing I'll point out is this is kind of a test video. Me and Trevor did a test live a while ago. I'm testing a software program to maybe do this a little bit more regularly with all three of us knuckleheads, and then you can see how far off the rails we really go when we're recording. Not only create blooper content, but to create the episode in the first place. But the blooper content is an absolute result of how far off the rails we can go sometimes. And Brian might be able to attest to this too, but we have a tendency to find some rabbit holes and just dive right in. So it's just what we're about. But no one has really said they hated being a guest. So there's that's a super great plug to come on and be a guest on our podcast. No one has hated it yet that we know of. So, but yeah, we have a tendency to go down these rabbit holes and tell stories. That's actually part of the stuff that we end up cutting from the episodes. We've had one opportunity to make kind of a highlights episode of some content that has been cut. We may do that again in the future, but I think we've been pretty fortunate in the way that this has taken off, no pun intended, that we've been able to get some really good guests in, and we haven't needed to do that. Even the episodes where we're on maybe a time crunch because of our personal schedules, in that case, we just push the episode out like on a Monday instead of a Saturday or Sunday. The goal is always Saturday, but as you see, sometimes it's Sunday, sometimes it's Monday. It just depends on personal life. End of the day, if my family's got some stuff going on, I'm going to try to prioritize that. I say try because if my wife watches this and calls me out on it, then I have to be honest. There are times that I'll find myself down here and just immerse myself in the audio. Another thing that I'll do is when I know that we're going down a rabbit hole, I have a cool feature on my I'm sorry, I'm reading some of the comments. On the platform that I used to do the editing, I can listen to it at like 1.7 speed, so we all sound like chipmunks, and for some reason, I just get a hell of a kick out of listening to Maddie, especially, laugh in 1.7 like a chipmunk. It cracks me up. So sometimes that's one of the fun parts of editing. The other fun part is picking out those bloopers that we share with you. A lot of them don't even make it in there, especially if we get a little sweary. We do try to keep it, kind of kid-friendly in case any of you do have your kids listening. So there's been a couple that we slip in there, but for the most part, the ones where we get pretty sweary, we just leave out. Again, first response type of work, it's been known to happen. And Trevor's still doing his military gig with the Guard. I'm a vet, so it comes with the territory. We get a little sweary sometimes. 7 hours, Brian, to get up to 6 Yankee 9. Whew, I think I'm right at around 2. So obviously Minnesota, Michigan, it's a little bit closer for me, but I'm curious if you found out anywhere you want to go sit down for lunch on the way up here to take a break. I would recommend somewhere near Minneapolis, but at that point you might as well just keep going all the way there because you're pretty much there or taking an offshoot to get here in the first place. Fire pilot. Grant Hooks knows aviation is about ? All right, Grant, what is it? I'm curious to see what he has to say. And Fire Pilot 6 Yankee 9, and that's Sydenham, Michigan. So there's some little event up there that I heard about from some guy on the internet. I'm going to go check that out. I'm going to meet him in person and just, check out the event, really. I couldn't make it to Oshkosh this year due to work, family conflicts, and we had our own family vacation the week after Oshkosh. So for me to take that much time off of work, I didn't feel real great about that personally. So I decided to break that up and not take the Oshkosh trip this year. But I think my wife hinted that I should plan our next vacation next year around Oshkosh. So that is the hope. I have 11 months to go back on that now at this point, but I haven't been to Oshkosh since 2018. I would really love to get back out there. It feels like it's been way too long since I've been, and now that I've been able to connect with more and more people, I can hopefully meet more people out there, expand the podcast brand a little bit, do some marketing, things like that. Hand out some stickers. I do have a whole box of stickers that we intended to hand out at Oshkosh. Maddie handed some out, but if we divide and conquer, we could have those stickers all over that place by the end of the week. Just saying. Fire Pilot Brian is right. You should absolutely fly to Michigan. I'm sure in your plane you get up there awfully quick, as opposed to my Sundowner or Slowdowner that I'll be flying over there. 3.5 is not that bad. That's way better than what Brian has to fly. That's 7 hours. Brian, is that 7 with pit stops, or are you just you're gonna stop places and screw around? Grant, you're right. Aviation is about the people. 100% agree. This is the part that also happens in the podcast. My son comes down the stairs and stands just off my shoulder over here, and he doesn't want to be seen on any type of video or audio format. He just stands and stares at me, and it's really uncomfortable and awkward for me, knowing he's right there and no one else can see him, and I have to act like nothing's happening. And he, being a 14-year-old boy, thinks it's hilarious. Brian, you have to be able to relate to this with your kids. They have to do something like this. My daughter does the same thing, except for she typically runs behind me and then realizes I'm recording, freezes, and then disappears one direction or the other, trying to crawl, but still being just like in camera shot. He's still there. What I really want to do is take this camera and point it at him so that he will be embarrassed and run up the stairs. Oh, that did it. All right, so yeah, it looks like so far right now the big conversation topic is Michigan. You should totally come. There's a couple other people that are former guests that I've sent out some information to as well. So hopefully we'll see some other people out there too. Your kids are embarrassed that you're a YouTuber, Brian? My daughter actually will listen to the podcast. I don't think she has a clue what we're talking about, but she listens and she likes the blooper reels too. There was the one episode that she was our pre-blooper voiceover person. That's not anywhere near the right words. She did the quick little intro to the blooper reel. We don't do that as much anymore. We used to have, we'd pick someone, whether it be a guest or a family member, to intro the blooper reel. Now we just kind of just dive right into it. And that's mostly because we create so many bloopers that for the audio track that I have in that background of that, it makes more sense to just jump right in because I have a hard enough time cutting bloopers in the first place. Grant, I do have a bright yellow shirt that has this logo on it in vinyl, like in a dark blue. So I'm prepared to lay out for the Human X on the runway. I'm a little disappointed that I won't be out there before Brian, because it'd be really cool to close the runway before he gets there. So he flies 6.5 hours nonstop and then runs into the big yellow X. But the airfield will be ours. I learned that on one of his videos. You put a big yellow X on the runway before you leave, and it's yours. Yeah, Fire Pilot, that was my plan too. I wanted to spend that vacation time over at Oshkosh. It just didn't pan out. We took a really cool trip around the Great Lakes. So as this podcast is called, Flying Midwest Podcast, I may have well called it the Driving Midwest, whatever I did. We drove through many of the around the Great Lakes. So we started in Minnesota. We ended up over at Niagara Falls, drove through Canada. So we kind of we hit all the Great Lakes for this summer vacation. So it was, I think, all said, about 25 hours in a vehicle with my children and my in-laws, who, don't get me wrong, my in-laws are great. I'm not trying to say that as, I was stuck with my in-laws. But stuck in a vehicle for that long with anyone over the course of a week is a long time. So, Tom Glass, what do I fly? I fly a Slowdowner, the Beechcraft Sundowner. It's a 1974 based out of the Anoka County Blaine Airport, as we talk about at the beginning of our podcast. does a really impressive top speed of, I don't know, maybe about a buck 20. It's not about the speed or anything like that for me, though. It's about just getting up and enjoying aviation. So I actually enjoy a nice long cross country when I can actually fit it in. Like my long cross country for my commercial rating, I flew down to Iowa and just made a day of it. It was a great time. It was southern Iowa, damn near Kansas, I think. But that's what I enjoy about like cross country stuff. Fire pilot, it's a B-23. There you go. You corrected yourself. Yep, B-23 is what I fly. There was one time that Minneapolis Center, when I called to ask for flight following, misheard me and entered me as a King Air. So approach was really confused when I checked in and asked me to verify my aircraft type. And they said, well, that makes a lot more sense. We thought you were King Air. We had no idea where you were going so slow. I don't know. I thought it was funny. My kid was with me. He didn't seem to get it or care. Useful load. I am the useful load in that plane. Oh, you're talking about something different. They're going to ask the hard questions that, like, this. You're making me feel like you're my DPE and I should know the answer to this right off the top of my head. Probably should. Right off the top of my head, I don't remember. It's too late at night. At 9:10 because I'm an old man. Good plane to race a Grumman. Well, Brian got rid of his, otherwise I'd say I could race him. What do you think, Brian? What is the top speed in that thing? I'd be willing to hear that. I guess here's the question I have too. As I'm looking, it doesn't tell me who's watching, it just says the number of people watching. If Maddie and Trevor are in here, I'd love to hear what you have to say too. Grant Hooks, that's what apps are for. Trevor would be so mad at you right now because you're supposed to know everything all the time. I'm kidding. That's not what he thinks. He's a very firm believer, though, in learning all the other things before the apps. And obviously, I think all of us aviators are certainly capable of doing that. I'd agree to some extent to his opinion, though, that there are some people that are too dependent on the electronics, like ForeFlight. And there's moments where, I'll be honest with you, there's times that I have been maybe too reliant on ForeFlight, but there's also times that is a hell of a resource. I did have to do a divert. I'm going to go off on a tangent here. So I did do a divert at one point. I was doing an instrument flight on the way back from far northwestern Minnesota back to the Twin Cities. And kind of in and out of the clouds. It was just a bumpy summer afternoon day with a bunch of cumulus around. Not the end of the world, but something didn't feel right as I was going through some of the clouds. And I opted to descend out of the clouds and just get bumped around a little bit more. And as I got out of the clouds, that's when my vacuum pump fully failed, as opposed to just partially failed. Something was goofed up with the vacuum pump. I could tell something was wrong with the instruments, and rather than try to troubleshoot that in the clouds, when I had the opportunity to descend, I descended. I told ATC just to confess my situation and opted to divert. ForeFlight was an awesome tool for that. I was able to quickly, make my decisions. I mean, I had plenty of fuel. I could go pretty much wherever I wanted. It was VFR mostly all around, but those are great things that you can look at as opposed to tuning in all these different frequencies to listen to weather around you. I mean, obviously you can look out the window too, but to get the weather reports, hear the winds, things like that, I can make a good educated decision on what would be the best airport to go to. So in that case, apps are fantastic. In other situations, yeah, I can agree that over dependence on that and not knowing how to do the simple things that you need to know, that can get people in trouble too. So tangent over. Brian, what is a CFIV? Are you like a volunteer CFI? And Grant, that's my goal. I'd like to be a CFI at some point. As I talked about a little bit earlier, I got to get done with commercial rating first, obviously. But from there, the plan is to become a CFI. It's going to be one of my goals I've got a long time to think about retirement, but someone in my line of work told me very early on, about every 5 years, reevaluate what your game plan is for if you can't do these jobs anymore. And then, be prepared to execute if you have to. First response stuff is a tough gig. So whether it be, mental health or something else, if you have some kind of out, that's it. And that's where I also go down my tangent of how the FAA handles some of their medical stuff. There are plenty of people out there that are fully capable of performing still with some basic mental health care. But there's also a lot of people that are afraid to seek that out because of that thought that if I go on some kind of medication, I'm going to be, I'm going to have to go through this huge process on a maybe. So I know basic med has helped with some of that, but it depends on what your goals are. I think for what I'm trying to do, if I need to go down that path, I can still do what I got to do. So another rabbit hole. See, told you, rabbit holes. I'm trying to understand your comment, Brian, because I don't think you're any of those things. ANPII. You guys are funny. I'm going to make up some acronym for what I do, but we'll figure it out. Maybe I'll have Trevor do it. They haven't chimed in, so I'm assuming that Trevor's probably studying or sleeping. I think he flies just about every day right now on the 130s, so... So I think I've talked about the merch. I've talked about what goes on behind the scenes of how this stuff comes together for a podcast in the first place. I've talked about kind of what all of us are up to. I've talked about Maddie and Trevor. I did talk about me. That commercial rating is the goal right now, and that's if there's hiccups with my scheduling, it's typically that. Work. Just because that is the primary means of my income. So that's got to come first sometimes, and sometimes there's conflicts. So you're like a big rig CFI, Brian? Is that what I'm understanding? Oh, Nathan, welcome. You were lied to by Brian Turner, which should probably come as no surprise to anybody. You are not going to get an IPC for just showing up. Unless, of course, he will sign off in your logbook, which he's been known to do and has gotten him multiple trips to the FSDO. So you can give that a shot, but... or maybe Grant will sign you off. I think he's a real CFI. I think Brian just makes things up. Grant is saying that when you are a CFI and teach in multiple types of airplanes, the apps really help and can save you from mixing up numbers, making mistakes. No, I believe that. Yeah, I got nothing more to add to that. I totally believe that. Everything's a little bit different, so... Tom, thank you for your comment on our podcast logo. That was Trevor's doing. He didn't create it, but he reached out to a graphic designer that put this together with some various types of insights from us and input. We told the guy basically what we're looking for, what we do, and he put this together. And there was only a couple of minor modifications that we even suggested. So Trevor's got the guy's name. I wish I could shout out to the guy, but I can't because I just don't know his name. But I do know that some of the modifications that Trevor asked for involved a promise of a flight with Trevor once he's back in a position to do so. So the guy leveraged it a little bit. I'll give him that. Brian, I've been on to you for a while, man. I'll leave it at that. Actually, the FSDO gave me a heads up. They just emailed me quick, said, hey, we know you talked to this guy. If you'd like to stay in our good graces, you should probably just cut that out. We keep bringing you back. I hope that you heard in the blooper reel. You know what, Brian, before I say anything more, have you listened to the latest episode? And Nathan, I am in Minnesota. I'm just north of Minneapolis. And actually, when we first started this podcast, all three of us were in Minnesota. I was north of Minneapolis, and the other two were in the southwest metro. Kind of closer to where the actual Minneapolis-St. Paul International Airport is. And since then, as of right now, I'm the only one still in Minnesota. Trevor is in Arkansas, but he will be coming back. And Maddie moved down to Kansas for a flight instructing gig. So, but yeah, other than that, that's where we all started out. We became acquainted through... Trevor and I have a mutual friend in common, and Trevor and I both have been talking about the idea of doing a podcast just separately in different silos. And we're connected with our friend Seth, who said, you guys are both talking about this thing, but you guys want to talk about it. And then Trevor and I got together. We talked about kind of our thoughts, our ideas, not just about podcasting, but other things as well. And we really hit it off. So we tried doing the podcast, and this is no fault to you, Trevor, or to me. Trevor said, "Hey, I got a CFI I'd like to bring in," and brought in Maddie. And then once Maddie came in, I think that really locked down our equation. Not to say that, I mean, I think Trevor and I probably would have been fine on our own, but Maddie brings a certain energy to us boring old guys, I think. Maddie being younger, Maddie just with her bubbly personality is just a lot of fun to record with. And I think that was the last piece that we needed to really make this come together. Been satisfied with the results. I think that the three of us agree that each time we record gets a little bit better as far as tightening up our interviews so that we're not recording for 2 hours. So I have to sit here for days trying to kind of bring that content down to a usable format. So that part it's been fun to watch how this has grown. And on that note, I guess I'll mention too that we're incredibly grateful for the people who have listened, for the people who continue to listen and have subscribed and have become friends of the podcast. Really, there's quite a few former guests that we continue to talk to regularly, and I know that people are probably tired of me dropping Brian Turner, but I mean, Brian has been a tremendous friend of our podcast in a lot of different ways. In talking to us in the first place with our first interview we did with him, and participating in an April Fool's episode, we thought it was right up his alley when we figured out we could get Brian Turner, and with the timeline of a recording, we could push this out April 1st. Let's do it. And Brian was totally on board. But then from there, helping us make connections with other aviators, giving us other ideas for things that we can do with not only our podcast, but things like what we're doing right now, where one of us, multiple of us could get on here and have this type of format conversation with people as well. That's something that, again, we're really looking on to the future to maybe do some more of those, whether it be me babbling at you, me and Trevor, me and Maddie, Trevor and Maddie, whatever the combination is, or maybe we get that Brian Turner guy in here, or some of our other guests. The Badger pilot we talk to all the time, he's out of Wisconsin. We've talked to him a bunch on social media, haven't been able to get him onto the I just saw the Jorts comments in the chat. I was really proud of myself with that comment. I wasn't proud of myself for making a mistake in the podcast about the 3/4 cutoff shirts. But once I was able to incorporate the jorts, I'm not going to lie to you, I was pretty proud of myself. And Maddie, I think we almost lost her, but we got her back. She was laughing so hard, she stopped breathing, I think. But being that I was in first response, if I needed to, I probably could have talked her through some sort of procedure to care for herself. Or told her another joke and maybe sent her off the deep end. I don't know. I'm going to go backwards and read a couple comments quick. I think I finished my train of thought. I think I was talking about... I don't know. The comments threw me off with the Jort comment. So, no, Grant, unfortunately, those aren't on there yet. I'm going to look on the actual website that we use to create our merchandise. I don't think they had jorts the first time I looked, or the cut-off t-shirts, but I'll look. Feel free if you want, though, to order one of the t-shirts and just cut it off and make yourself a crop top. We will not judge anyone for that, so if that's your choice of clothing, have at it. The jorts I might judge a little bit, but you can just take one of our stickers and slap that on there. It'll be just fine. Brian, your accident analysis video, I will agree with Grant. That was hilarious. And Trevor talked about that movie. We asked in that quick 5 questions a few episodes ago about people's least favorite aviation movie, or what's the worst aviation movie. And some people are like, well, if it's a bad aviation movie, we even have heard of it. And Trevor brought up, or I think it's Horizon Lines, right? And then to watch Brian's analysis of it was just fantastic. Let's see. Eric, welcome, man. I have a question for you that I'm going to send you offline, I think, in reference to the video you did with Kyle Franklin. He's going to be our next guest. We interview him tomorrow, actually. So we'd love to share your video on our social media as we get ready for this episode, just to show what he can do in the cockpit. Man, that is a cool video that you put out there. Not just the amount of work he is doing in there, but how much fun he's having. So that was really cool. I'd love to chat with you offline about it a little bit if you're willing to. So please don't hold the fact that I talk about Brian a lot against me. It happens. He's very charismatic, and I can't help it. Flyboy Man. You asked, what do I do for work? I typically don't broadcast this to the world, but I've mentioned a couple times that I work in first response. I don't want to get too in depth on what exactly I do in that, but I do public safety work and first response stuff. I'll probably just leave it at that for right now. Some people know that I share with, but I don't typically broadcast too much of that. Which, for those of you in public safety, probably have already figured out what I do. So, another question came in about where in the Midwest are we. I'll cover that. We talked about it a little bit ago, but I'll mention it again. I'm in Minnesota. Maddie was from Minnesota and now lives in Kansas, and Trevor also is from Minnesota. So at the start, it was a fairly tight-knit Minnesota-based crew, and we've kind of spread out from here to different areas of the country. Trevor is, again, in C-130 Flight Engineer School down in Alabama. He's got, I think he's supposed to be done early October, and then he'll be back in Minnesota after that, where he and I will probably do some flying together. I have a GoPro camera. Well, it's not a GoPro. It's a different type of camera, but I do have a camera now that we do plan on making some more content with in that regard. So I had mentioned earlier that YouTube is something that we do want to expand into a little bit more. I know the podcast is called the Flying Midwest Podcast, and the point initially was to have it Midwest based, to have it be, excuse me, to have it be, connecting that group of aviators. But as we found out very quickly, you can't just limit it to one area of the country, just because of this, how quickly we can spread to other areas just with other people that we know. I mean, let's look at this chat just in itself. I mean, Brian in Texas, and I think I'm going to butcher this, but Fire Pilot, are you in Kentucky? You can tell me a second. I got a fun note just handed to me, just hot off the wire. Flyboy Man, I know exactly who you are. Just know that I know that you're in your bedroom upstairs. Smart ass. How much did the plane cost? He knows exactly how much it costs. The plane that I own, I am in a 5-part partnership though. So I don't own it just by myself. There are 5 of us that partner in the aircraft, share expenses, things like that. So that kid of mine, he is a character. See, now he's gonna start start making comments in there. All right, funny boy. You wait and see how much I embarrass you when you go to high school next year. It's coming like a freight train. Clever name, though. I wouldn't have guessed that was you. Well done, young man. You were dimed out, though. Lexington, Kentucky. I can't say I've ever been to Kentucky. I know that we've talked about doing some travel to like Nashville, maybe that area of the country, things like that at some point, but maybe a vacation down the road. Who gave the thumbs down? My kid? The thumbs down he's going to get is going to be a lot different. He forgets who pays for all of his stuff upstairs. He's going to get thumbs down on his internet connection. To cringe him out a little bit, I'm going to say, hey, we still have merch. I have a coffee cup even that has the podcast logo on it. Sick my moderator. I am the moderator. I will sick the moderator on him in the near future. I don't want to run upstairs and kill his internet right now. He on occasion can be really funny. So we'll see what happens here. As long as, Eric, you're popping in the chat again, I'm a fan of your stuff too, man. I love the videos that you put out there, and some of those, walk arounds, things like that. That Kyle Franklin one to me was just, and I think the timing was just right that we saw that you're putting out that video, and we got the word from him that he'd be willing to come on to see to see the timing that you put that out there was really cool. It is. He looks like he's having so much fun with what he's doing, and that's what it's all about, I think. One leg shorter than the other. That's on your pants. You should just wear jorts. You guys have those in Kentucky? You gotta have those in Kentucky. Jorts and wife beaters. That's got to be a thing. I will look into getting wife beaters with the podcast logo on it too, if you're interested. And I'll just. Oh, Eric, you nailed it, man. He is so busy in that cockpit, and before we saw that video, we're talking amongst ourselves about. I wonder how much work it is to fly that bad, and you nailed it. That with your different angles and the way that you put that video together, it was really cool, man. We really enjoyed that. Me personally, I really enjoyed it too. Just seeing how much work that was, and he's super busy in that cockpit, constantly doing something in there to maintain that, to be able to do that safely. It's pretty impressive. I couldn't imagine doing that stuff. I would probably do more than just scrape my wing. So we've been at it for about an hour now. I'm probably going to call it quits here for the night unless anyone has any other questions. Yeah, I believe it, Eric. It's got to be hard to fly that bad. Yeah, we're super pumped to talk to him tomorrow, and that is an episode that I think is going to be really fun to not just produce but share with everybody else too. And those of you that were brought over here or dragged in here against your will by Brian Turner, check out our podcast. If you like what we're doing, especially if you create content too, hit us up. We'll talk to anybody. We just love sharing aviation with other people. Yeah, that it is really cool when most of the stuff he does is cool. I can't just narrow it down just to the main wheel squeaking, but that's pretty cool. Eric, we're talking to him tomorrow, probably around 8 o'clock tomorrow, but that's not going to be a live like this. It'll be our pre-recorded podcast that we do, and then we'll throw that together and we will publish that. This is a little bit off with our timing. We'll publish that on. I'm going to look at a calendar here, so I'm not just making things up. It'll probably be the weekend of it'll be like the 10th or 11th of September that episode actually gets published. So those that missed it earlier, the process is typically we will interview the person that we're going to interview either the week in advance of the episode being dropped or maybe even a week before that. And then we will record the intro, our news and events, and our outro like the Wednesday before the actual published date. That gives me time to get in there and edit things. And if there's certain things that we want to I don't think I discussed this earlier, but if there's certain things that we want to hit on specifically from the interview within our intro, outro, then that interview is out of the way. We know what the highlights are already going to be, so we can better sell that interview within the intro. The outro, that's just kind of just a form of any of the news or any other things that might come up during the week before the actual publication of the podcast. We do the outro at that point in case we need to add something else at the end too. So it is there is a method to our madness. Honestly it's a creative process for me too, where I can take all that raw audio and make something out of it that hopefully people enjoy listening to. Let's see. There's been a bunch of comments because I made this silly comment about I was going to leave and then I didn't. Brian, I can't wait to meet you either, man. I'm super pumped for that. Even if it's just us shooting the shit outside of a tent somewhere out of that place, I'm super excited. I have more questions for you. I will try not to stick a recorder in your face. We'll see what happens. But yeah, I'm super excited for this weekend. It's going to be a blast. I haven't had an opportunity to do anything like this, like a camp flying, ever. I used to camp a lot with my dad, not aviation related, but I've done fly-ins, but something like this is unique for me. So I'm excited to go to that, and I'm excited to share some things in the Midwest aviation-wise too. So And thanks for the compliments on doing the live tonight. This is, again, an experimental thing, so I'm glad that it has worked out the way that it has. And I thank all of you for your contributions, your jokes, comments that you've made throughout, that I've been able to continue babbling for an hour and not really gotten tired of it yet. Let's see here. What else do I got before I miss anything else? Yeah, I agree, Eric. Great folks in this chat here. Not just from the ones I've been able to have a chat with personally, but just some of the content creators that I've been watching and trying to, see, not just see what else is out there, but, expand my own aviation experience, lack of better terms. So checking out more and more content creators, especially as I've started making our own content with the podcast. So the YouTube is kind of just an offshoot of that at some point that we hope to do a little bit more of. And I don't know even what that's going to look like yet. It could be interviews like we do with the podcast. It could just be going to cool events and videotaping stuff and putting up stuff. I don't dare touch satire because I couldn't hold a candle to Brian. So I will let the professional handle that aspect of it. But we're looking for some ideas. We're talking about some ideas on what to do on the YouTube front. So we'll see where that goes. All right, I think with all that said, I'm going to call it for the night. So those of you who watched it live, I appreciate you being here. I appreciate the comments. Those of you who are checking this out later, thanks for watching the channel as we develop the YouTube content. If you're a podcast fan to begin with, thank you for enjoying the podcast and listening to that and sharing that with others. And if you're not part of the podcast community yet, you're not listening to that, we can be found on all kinds of different podcasts, all kinds of different podcast platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, a bunch of different platforms that you'll be able to check us out on. Within our website itself, which is flyingmidwest.com, right on the homepage, it has all these different links to these different platforms where we do host the podcast. So if you're not listening to the podcast, we would love to have you check that out as well. So that is our primary thing. YouTube is just a thing we're starting on the side, but we will for sure do one of these in the future. Maybe I'll have it Maddie and Trevor, maybe other guests on here as well. So don't know how frequent. We'll see what happens. So thank you again, everyone. Certainly appreciate it. And see ya. Good night.